This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio brings you relevant and detailed discussions about software engineering topics at least once a month. Thanks to our audience and the partners listed on our website for supporting the podcast.
Welcome to a new show on Software Engineering Radio. My name is Michael and my guest today is Jurgen Appelo. We are talking about leading Agile developers. Jurgen, when I read about articles about you, you describe yourself as being a leader, a developer, but not a consultant, but also author. So how would you introduce yourself, and what are you actually?
Well, I've been a manager for 15 years. I don't do that anymore since a few months. I switched to training and writing about management and leadership to try and help other people to do it well. But as you said, I do not do coaching or consultancy because I believe other people are better at that than I am. Personally, I prefer the writing and the training.
And what we are talking about today is your latest book, and I guess it's also your first book, as far as I know. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's true.
The book is called Agile Management 3.0.
Management 3.0, yeah.
Good. So what is the book about in 3 sentences before we go into more detail on the book?
There are a number of books about Agile software development, many actually, but most of them are for software developers or project managers or testers. And this is, I believe, the first one that really tackles the role of the line manager and team leader in an Agile organization.
Okay, and I mean, looking at your history and looking at the title, you must have felt the urgent need to communicate on that aspect and to basically share your experiences.
Yes, because as research points out that Agile has some difficulty being accepted in many organizations because of the responsibilities of management not being clear. Usually managers are seen as impediments in Scrum teams, for example, or Agile teams in general. And I think managers are not just impediments, they have an important role to play in changing and transitioning the organization to Agile.
Could you briefly elaborate your own experiences, your history as a manager, as a developer in Agile organizations?
Sure. I started out as a software developer and then quickly ended up in management positions. And because I never learned how to be a manager, I basically did it wrong in every way that I could. So it took me a while to learn how to do it right. This took me a number of years, and at the same time I was learning about Agile software development. And a number of years ago I decided to introduce Scrum in the organization that I was managing at the time as CIO, Chief Information Officer. So that was a decision by me as a manager in the organization. And I believe by then I had learned through trial and error what the role of the manager could be. And that's when I decided to start writing about it.
You say you did learn how to do it right. So how did you know that you did it right?
I think one of the best compliments I got when I quit my recent job is that a former team member said to me, I never really saw you as my manager. I saw you as a colleague who made sure that I could do my best job. And this is, I believe, exactly what a manager should do. Should go out of his way to make sure the teams can do their best possible job. And that is, I think, the purpose of a manager.
Good. So you called it 3.0. Now we live in the age of Web 2.0. Why did you call it 3.0?
Well, it started out as a tongue-in-cheek title because, as you said, there's Web 2.0. Actually, there's already Web 3.0 and there's Motivation 3.0. And I thought it would be fun to have a book title with a version number in it because I wanted to appeal to software developers. And I said jokingly, that's why it has to have a version number. But there's also a sort of a philosophy behind it, which is that the first version of management, as far as I see it, was or is traditional command and control management as it is still being practiced in many organizations. And the second version of management consists of all the fads and hypes we've seen in the past few decades that are that have a lot of usefulness in them, but people try to apply them to that old architecture of traditional command and control hierarchies, which means it doesn't really work that well. In my opinion, as I call it, Management 3.0 is the first version of management with a good architecture, which is that the organization is a network and not a command and control hierarchy. And if you see the organization as a social network, then you can reuse all those previous best practices that have usefulness, but apply them in a more modern fashion. And that's what I call Management 3.0.
Okay, so does Management 3.0 basically build on 2.0, or is it just totally radically different from what everything was before management good practice?
No, it is not totally radically different because many people have applied very useful practices over the last few decades, and they're all still valuable. But if you apply them in an organization that is led in a command and control fashion, then those best practices have a very hard time of actually working properly. So that's how I see it. It is Management 3.0 is not a collection of brand new, radically innovative practices. It is just common sense applied in a way that is working well in the 21st century with an organization as a network instead of a hierarchy. So some people might call some of the practices in the book not new, but that's because they're common sense, and I just show them in a new jacket, so to speak.
Why is Agile development so different, or are the people different today? I mean, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we had also software development. We had successful software development. So did the change to Management 3.0 come through Agile development? Or what made it now so important?
I think we have to distinguish two different developments in the last number of decades. The first one was computer programming in general, which started out as a sort of anarchistic way of trying to make sure that computers did what we wanted from the 50s and onwards. And then in the 80s, software engineering was born as a response to the cowboy style of coding. The universities tried to turn it into something that was more structured, more formal. And I've been raised as a software engineer myself. I had a university degree, so I know what it looked like. And yes, as you said, there have been successful software in the past, both with cowboy programming, anarchistic programming, and with the structured formal approach. But Agile software development at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, realized that there is a middle road between anarchy and order, and that is complexity. This nicely aligns with complexity science, one of my favorite topics, which says that the real innovation lies between the ordered and the chaotic systems. And that is where the living systems are, the ones that grow from bottom up. And this is exactly what you read also in the first books on Agile software development, where they refer to complexity science as one of the sources of inspiration for the Agile leaders at that time.
Because software development is more a social thing as something which you can 100% strictly plan in that meaning?
Exactly, yes, because a software project can be seen as a living system with participants that all are in there for their own purposes, but try to cooperate and produce some output. And that is what complex systems tend to do. It is not a machine that you control from the top. It is if you see it as a living system, it is much more useful.
In your book, you introduce 6 distinct views. Should we go briefly over each of those views?
Yeah, sure. I have 6 views mentioned in my book, and the first one is energize people. This is the first responsibility of development managers and team leaders, to make sure that people are in a project or in teams are energized. The second one is empower teams, which is about making sure that self-organization works, that people have authority to make decisions themselves. The third one is align constraints, which is about setting goals to make sure that self-organization leads to results that are valuable for the business. The fourth one is develop competence, aligned with the craftsmanship movement, for example, which is about people developing themselves. The fifth one is grow structure, which recognizes that teams operate within the context of an organization, and you may have multiple teams that have some relationship with each other, so you have to think about the structure of the organization. And the last one is improve everything, about continuous improvement of not just of processes, but also of people, functionality, quality, and everything.
Mm-hmm. In the Energize People view, you talk about do-it-yourself team values. How did you come up with that?
There are a number of values in Agile and in the Scrum and extreme programming methods, for example, where they mention courage, focus, openness, respect, trust as basic values of Agile teams. And when I researched these words, I found out that these are actually all virtues of human beings. And there are many more virtues, like assertiveness, caution, enthusiasm, curiosity, persistence, thoroughness, etc., etc. And I thought, well, many of those virtues are very beneficial in an Agile setting. And I realized that the ones that should have the most attention probably depend on the context of the team. Like, for example, in my last software team, we didn't have any problems with respect and trust. There was lots of respect and trust in the team. But we did need a little bit more orderliness and self-discipline, for example. So I thought, well, maybe we should have all the virtues listed and ask teams to circle the ones that they struggle with or that they think are important for their current project in their current context, and then focus on those. So that it might depend on the team which ones are important.
Okay, so it's left as a team exercise where to focus the team with its values.
Exactly. We did that ourselves. We took the list of 50 virtues, and with dot voting, we made sure that we aligned on the 5 or 7 virtues that we thought were most important to us for our project. And a few of them were exactly the same as in Agile, and a few were different, but we found them to be important.
Next is empower teams. What is important about the 10 intrinsic desires?
Well, there are lots of theories about intrinsic desires, and self-determination theory is one, and the 16 basic desires is another one. And basically it boils down to the fact that as with values, desires may differ per person. So for example, some people need orderliness in their environment. They are in need of structure, while others, like me for example, I thrive in anarchy. I love things not to be too structured around me. And it is the same for other desires. Like some people care very much about status, while others don't think that is important at all. And I think managers can take those differences into account and align the work that people do with what is important to them. If a person really needs orderliness, for example, maybe that person would love to take care of the wiki pages where the team process are described or something like that. This could be taken up by the team themselves, by team members themselves, through self-organization. But a manager could also make sure that what people are doing is aligned with how they are.
Align is the right keyword for the third view, align constraints. What are your tips for defining goals?
I think goals and purpose are treated somewhat simplistically in a number of management books. If you consider a software team as a living system, as I prefer to do, then I can only conclude that there are different kinds of purposes. And there is, for example, a difference between an emergent purpose, a goal that a team themselves come up with, and an extrinsic purpose, which is a goal that a manager assigns to a team. And then there are the purposes of the individual stakeholders, like a product owner has a purpose, and the customer has a purpose, and individual employees have their purposes, and suppliers have a purpose. So there are many kinds of goals and purposes, and I believe it makes sense to distinguish between a purpose that a manager assigns to a team. Like, for example, we have to be profitable next year with our product, otherwise we're out of business. And at the same time, the team themselves can come up with a purpose. Like, we want to be the best performing extreme programming team in our company. And these should go hand in hand. It is the same as raising children, where parents have had a purpose for their children, otherwise they wouldn't have had children. But at the same time, the children grow up and define purposes for themselves, and these have to align with each other.
So the company would have to allow the development team to define at least part of its purpose, right?
Yes, exactly. Because it is a living system, it has a reason for existence. And we call it emergence when a self-organizing system comes up with properties at the system level, and the purpose of a living system is typically an emergent property. You cannot predict what it is, but it is there in the interaction between the team members. And any purpose that the team comes up with has to be evaluated with the manager, and hopefully it can be aligned with the purpose that that management has for the teams. That would be the best outcome.
So it sounds it's the right thing, but how do you convince your environment that letting the team define part of the purpose is a good thing?
Well, how do you define that a child can have its own purpose in life? That just happens. If you ignore that your children have their own reasons for existence, and you basically instruct them and tell them what to do, they won't be happy in the long run. They may do what you want in a short while, but in the long run you will lose their commitment. This is exactly what happens with many software teams. If they just get told what to do, you lose their long-term commitment. So I believe it is important to accept that a team may have a purpose of their own if you want to have a sustainable software development environment.
Okay. Develop competence. How do you know what to develop as a manager? How would you identify competence gaps?
I think it is important to have some form of measurements. It is very difficult to come up with good measurements. Measurements and KPIs are often used in very wrong ways, incorrect metrics. But it is crucial to know how to do better by tracking how you're doing. Like if you're exercising, then you're probably tracking your heart rate or the number of kilometers that you ran or the number of push-ups. If you don't, then how will you know how to do better or if you did better than before? So this is basically measuring yourself. It is what Scrum teams do when they track velocity or when they track bug count or whatever. It is evaluating their own performance, and that's where it starts. Coming up with good metrics that align with the purpose of the team and of management, and then try to understand what to do to be better next time.
Under the view of growth structure, you mentioned the term value network. What is a value network?
Well, this is another example of what it means to see an organization as a complex system, because the usual words in Agile development and in Lean development are value streams and value stream mapping and value chains, for example. But these have linear connotations. They associate with linear flow of value. But if you see your organization as a complex system, then you understand that value does not only go in the direction of the customer. There's also suppliers and shareholders and employees and the local community where the business resides, for which the business supplies employment. So there are many stakeholders in an organization, and they all try to draw value out of that cooperation. So if you understand, if you realize that, then you realize that it is not one value stream that you have a value network with value going in different directions. And I see an organization as a number of teams that all try to provide value to each other, and that value should end up ultimately at the customer side or with the shareholders or with the suppliers or any of the other stakeholders.
Next one is improve everything. What are the tips for continuous improvement? Well, sharpen the saw, we've learned already several times. Now, what do you recommend?
Well, if we try to be concrete here, there are a number of tips from other sources that I collected. Like, for example, to have an improvement backlog. So not only a backlog for your product that you're working on, but also a backlog for improvements of the team and the organization that have a wider scope than just the current project. Another example is to have a transition team consisting of people as representatives of different roles and functions from the organization, where they lead the agile transition in the entire organization. Another one is, very popular these days, is to have Kanban boards for product development, where Kanban is actually a continuous improvement framework that, through visualizing the flow of value, makes sure that you see what parts of the collaborating team need to be improved in order to make that value flow faster. So those are a few examples of what you can do to improve your business.
Okay, so we covered now the 6 views. Are there more views? How would you know those? You have those 6. Is this one way to categorize your experiences?
Yes, my last chapter of the book explains that in the end all models are wrong, but some are useful. I find my own model useful for now, but probably I will come up with 1 or 2 views later that I think I should have added. But we will see. Maybe stakeholder management might be one that could be turned into a 7th view at some point in the future edition or something.
Looking at the introduction of Agile methodologies, at Agile mindset, and also introducing your best practices, it's typically a larger transition that needs to happen. How would you help people to move from an old style management to a more agile way?
I think one of the most important things is to make things visible. This is exactly what Scrum does, for example. It makes, and Kanban as well, they make things visible by showing the work on a task board where sticky notes flow from the left to the right, and as soon as you start doing that, you see what the bottlenecks are, that things are happening that you didn't expect, etc., etc. And they call that visual management. Scrum is just one example of visual management. By making things visible, you make it painful, and then there will be an urge to change it. And this is one of the most important aspects of change management in organizations. To make things visible. So if you start by that, and you can do that with management as well. This probably is the first step to begin with.
What would be the second step?
The second step, find inspiration in by reading and going to conferences, etc. Because as I point out in my book, there are no easy solutions. People regularly ask me for the silver bullets, the 1 or the 2 simple things that you can do to totally transform your organization. And that's not how it works. Every organization is different, every team is different, and you will have to adapt the advice by others to your own context. So it is impossible to tell people how to start changing the organization without any knowledge of their context. So my only advice is to make things visible and learn by reading and by seeing what others are doing, and adopt anything that makes sense to you.
What are typical situations where you think this management style, the Management 3.0 style, is not well suited? So when would you actually say and recommend not to use this kind of management style?
I think it is pretty well suited for many types of organizations, but it will be harder in some of them. Like, for example, if you have organizations where politics are a very important part of what is going on, and not only in political parties, but also in very traditional bureaucratic organizations where politics is an integral part of what is happening, then it will be very hard to implement the practices and the ideas that I describe in my book. Another situation might be where a business is basically a one-man show, one person who has his own style and vision, etc., on whatever needs to be produced, and just needs the help of a few others. That might also not be a situation where some of the practices are easily applied, because Agile is particularly about teamwork and self-organizing teams with little command and control from the top.
In my experience, processes are typically tightly aligned with organization, how you organize the teams. For example, whether the team lead is also the scrum master or not, whether the team lead leads or has a complete scrum team, or whether you have a matrix organization where a team lead would be the manager of certain roles only. I mean, there are certain cross influences between an organization and the methodology that the organization employs. Now, with this management style, you assume a certain process environment, I assume. This is my assumption. So what are the organizational assumptions, basically, that you have?
Actually, I believe that it is the other way around, that I describe that every organization is unique. Just like every species in nature is unique to its own environment. And as I have described, you cannot tell that a starfish is better than a spider, because a starfish is the best solution for its environment in the sea, and the spider is the best solution for its own environment in my cellar. So it depends on the context, and the same applies to processes, as Scrum Masters versus product owners, and who can do what, and how teams need to be aligned with other teams, what kind of structures they have. I give a number of suggestions basically in my book that work well in a number of settings, but I have a huge disclaimer in the form of chapter 16, where I say that where I even have a complexity pamphlet saying that in the end it all depends on your own context, and you will have to just figure out by trial and error what works for you. So never believe the fundamentalists who say that you have to do this because this is the best practice. There are no best practices. There are only useful practices. And please try them first before you try their own, because they are not... they are useful for a reason, but you might have a situation that is special to you, so you will have to adapt or invent your own.
So, any conclusions that you would like to share at the end of our interview with our listeners?
It is a difficult thing to do, to become a better manager, a better software developer, a better project manager. But what I believe is often the problem in many organizations, that few people learn. Few people actually take the opportunity and really pick up a book or a podcast, listen to a podcast, or download some movies from other leaders, and try to understand how to be better at their jobs. This is what I've noticed many times, that people think they are already very competent. As they say, 90% of the people think their competence is above average. Well, we all know that formula doesn't work out. So we all have to keep learning how to be better.
Okay. Thank you, Jurgen, for the interview, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Software Engineering Radio. SE Radio is an educational program brought to you by Hillside Europe. If you want more information about the podcast and the other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. If you want to support us, you can donate to the SE Radio team via the website, or you can advertise for SE Radio, for example, by clicking on the Dig, Reddit, Delicious and Slashdot buttons, or by talking about us on Twitter and Facebook. You can also support us by joining the team and shouldering some of the work. To contact the team, please send an email to team@se-radio.net, or if your feedback is specific to an episode, please use the comments facility on the website so other people can react to your comments. This episode of SE Radio, as well as all other episodes, are licensed under a Creative Commons 2.5 license. Please see the website for details.